Thank you for tuning in to the Street Writer Podcast. My name is Noah, aka Big Max. You might remember me from the old Capcom Unity or 1UP blogs. We're doing a series on the history of the Brawler. When we last left off, the Brawler had pretty much hit a peak, and that's because the fighting game genre had just taken over it. So we're looking at the end of 91, the start of 92. So let's pick up where we left off. Konami made sure that 1992 got off to a good start with the X-Men game. Their next title was also a licensed brawler. In fact, I don't think I remember Konami having any non-licensed brawling game in the early 90s. Anyhow, Bucky OHare was a popular animated series based on an independent comic. It featured a crew of anthropomorphic aliens, sort of alien animals that were fighting for freedom out in the cosmos. The game was lighthearted and followed the visual style of the cartoon, sort of like the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles cartoon. They were staying very close to the source material. In the case of Bucky OHare, going so far as to include sound bites from the voice actors on the actual TV series. The game was not very difficult for seasoned players. It was not meant to introduce new gameplay elements. The title was important, however, because it was designed for a new generation of gamer. The bright colors, smooth animation, clean level design could be seen as an attempt to make a kid-friendly brawler. Those players would be interested in trying out the other titles from Konami and help keep the industry growing. One of the other titles that could be described as player-friendly, perhaps younger, player-oriented, was Silent Dragon by Taito. It was a very formulaic 4-player brawler, capitalizing on the Western fascination with ninjas, fights, and random monsters. The large, colorful sprites were very well animated, and the game never felt too heavy-handed. Silent Dragon was about as simple and straightforward as a brawler could get. Taito did not develop a game as much as they picked characters, designs, and themes from other studios and put them in a game. Taito had not done players any favorites, but they were helping move the industry forward with the cross-pollination of elements. Irem did a better job with the brawler they introduced that same year. Undercover Cops returned to the Japanese roots of pandering to the West while making some interesting design choices. In the far future, the year 2015, it's kind of odd to think about it now, crime had run amok. Different gangs, some bordering on cults, ruled the streets. Officials formed a team of what they called city sweepers to clear out the thugs, mutants, and creeps. I think there was something lost in translation when the characters were created. The 3 playable characters were Claude, the ex-karate master, Bubba, the ex-pro football player, and Flame, the ex-female vigilante. I always laugh wondering how somebody could be an ex-karate master, as if they got hit too many times in the head and forgot how to perform karate. Or Flame, who was a ripoff of Blaze from Streets of Rage. Flame was an ex-female vigilante. I thought Poison and Roxy from Final Fight were the only transgender brawlers, but I digress. So what made Undercover Cops unique compared to the other brawlers? Well, it actually allowed all 3 playable characters on screen to choose the same character, rather than being forced to use their partners. Characters also had special attacks and techniques that allowed them to knock leaping opponents out of the sky or strike opponents on the other side of the screen. The best brawling experiences were built around characters that weren't slightly better than their opponents, but had access to techniques and abilities that made fighting fun rather than redundant. The hard-hitting heroes that young boys idolized in these games were and should always be head and shoulders above the lowest goon and almost on par with the boss characters. The game was notable also in that the visuals were dark and detailed. Those were the trademarks of other Irem titles. Some of the artists that worked on Undercover Cops would be the same people drawing the insanely detailed pieces for Gun Force 2, In the Hunt, and the iconic Metal Slug series. The last 2 great titles worth mentioning from that year were both set in the Middle East. Sega returned with their System 32 engine and scalable sprites when they released Arabian Fight. The game featured some of the largest sprites ever in a brawling game, and I do recommend you check it out on YouTube if you get a chance. It's Sega, and the game is Arabian Fight, to see how huge these sprites were. The engine would pan out to show more of the stage as players move further and further away from each other. So it was not until this game was released that the limitations of sprite-based combat in pseudo 3D environments really became visible. In case you don't know what I'm talking about, because the majority of games you probably play today are in 3D. So, a sprite is an animated 2D image. It can be presented to gamers with a sense of weight and depth if an artist and a programmer remembers to draw in the details like shadows and highlights as well. The other visual elements in the game, like the perspective and the angles used to draw levels, could help players visualize the sprite as moving in 3 dimensions. Arabian Fight constantly scaled in and out far more than in the Spider-Man game. As the camera kept changing distance, it became obvious to players that they were looking at 2D objects. The sprites appeared like animated hieroglyphs, flat characters from the walls of some ancient Egyptian tomb. Now, if Sega had meant for the entire story to play out on the walls of a temple or on the pages of a book, then the effect would have been revolutionary. Unfortunately, the game was supposed to take place in 3D space, and as often as the sprites scaled, the game suffered. Players were not fans of the paper-thin sprites. They seemed to ignore the magic system from the game, and even the exotic locations featured within as well. The game was Sega's second sleeper in a row. They would shy away from further arcade brawlers, and concentrate instead on their home series with the Streets of Rage sequels. Despite the lackluster showing from Arabian Fight, the genre was still in need of new places to visit and explore. The use of exotic locations and legendary characters to play as would help expand the universe. Taito answered the call through Arabian magic. Like Arabian Fight, it too featured multiple characters to play as and a magic system. The locations were even similar, including elaborate palaces, mysterious dungeons, flying carpets, and pirate ships. The similarities ended there. Taito used a fixed camera that highlighted the small but detailed figures on elaborate backgrounds. The game worked because it pandered to the fantastic legends that most gamers in the West had grown up with, not necessarily from reading the adventures of Sinbad or the 1001 Arabian Nights of Scheherazade, but instead from consuming those legends in movies. That was certainly the case for my brothers and I, as we were raised on the classics like The Thief of Baghdad and The Golden Voyage of Sinbad. Many a Sunday afternoon was spent watching those movies on TV, wondering how the Kali statue was brought to life, or how the other special effects were accomplished before the aid of computers. The legends of Sinbad were always more appealing to me as a youngster. It was always easier to identify with a dark-skinned hero, even if it was only a tan on the character, than the pasty white guys playing King Arthur and Robin Hood. Not to mention that the love interest, a chesty Caroline Munro, that sent my adolescent head spinning. Guinevere and Maid Marian could stay locked up in a tower for all I cared. Anyhow, my brothers and I loved the magic, fantasy, and worlds that those movies exposed us to, and we were eager to see how they would be adapted into a game. Prince of Persia, released by Broderbund, gave us a taste of that world in 1989. Still, we longed for something a bit more epic. Arabian Magic was the title we were hoping to see in arcades much earlier. The sprites and opponents were a fraction of the size of those in Arabian Fight, but the game was exponentially greater. The archetypes fought in exotic palaces, decorated in elaborate tiles and ornate rugs, many of them set with traps and pitfalls. Towering minarets of gold dotted the background. Players battled guards, assassins, skeleton warriors, sorcerers, and magical creatures. The boss characters could be captured and placed in lamps if they were defeated. The magic system in the game was unlike those from other titles. Players had a finite number of djinn or genies that they could help capture and use. Each spell had its own effect and range. Once used, the spirit was gone forever. This management of items was unique amongst all of the brawlers. The locations and heroes from Myth, including Sinbad, were the icing on the cake. The game wasn't perfect for its minimal animations. Had a studio like Capcom developed it, then it would have easily made the list of like the top 10 greatest brawlers of all time. 1992 was a very quiet year for the genre compared to the previous year. The handful of games released did have their own charm, but they would be forgotten as the industry pushed forward. In the next podcast, we're going to take a look at how the genre continued to evolve. So thank you for tuning in. Again, my name is Noah, and as always, if you enjoyed this podcast and would like to sponsor me, please visit my Patreon page. You can find me there. I am Street Writer, and consider donating every month. I do appreciate everybody that's supported me in the past, everybody that continues to support me, and I hope you're enjoying this series on the history of the brawling games. So we're going to keep it up, and I hope to see you on the next episode. Have a great day.